Cybersecurity experts scrambling to assess the scale of the attack.
A cyber attack on Latitude Financial.
All details of millions of Optus customers at risk.
It's organised crime. It's a modern-day version of the mob.
Australia is under attack and the enemy is anonymous.
With all of these attacks, they are intense, they're stressful, it's hard not to feel anxiety.
We might think it's one guy in a basement wearing a hoodie, but the reality is it is a business operation. On some counts, global cybercrime is the third biggest economy in the world.
Every 7 minutes, a cyber attack is reported in Australia. And businesses are paying tens of millions of dollars in ransoms.
This hurts many people. Businesses go out of business, people lose their jobs, stocks plummet in their value. There's a lot of damage.
This Four Corners episode cracks open the operations of the cyber gangs targeting Australia.
This structure, you get scale. You look like any other software company, but you're actually just a criminal organization.
I think he's online now. So he's come back with Australians are the most stupidest humans alive, and they have a lot of money for no reason, a lot of money and no sense at all.
We go to Ukraine to track them down.
Nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you.
And discover we are battling a common enemy.
So they hit Australia?
Yeah, these guys target Australia, yeah.
The Australian government warns we must all brace for more attacks.
We're not powerless when it comes to cyber attacks. We can hack back. And the instruction of the Australian government now is you go, you rove the world, you find these people and you hurt them before they can hurt us.
So this is the place where our analysts are monitoring the networks of our customers for malicious activity that suggests that maybe it's the beginning of a ransomware attack.
So as you can see, we have 2 detections, 2 executions that were allowed and 5 were blocked.
We'd be doing a couple of hundred major incidents a year.
Often we'll wake up when there's a high severity alert. Like if there's something bad happening, you don't want to leave it till the next morning to respond to it.
It's a bit of a cat and mouse game, really. The defenders get better. The cybercrime ecosystem is incredibly resilient. They operate from offshore safe havens. Russia, for example, greenlights its ransomware and cyber extortion actors, provided they don't attack Russian targets.
As head of intelligence for cybersecurity company CyberCX, Catherine Manstead understands the inner workings of the criminal syndicates causing chaos in the lives of Australians.
What we're defending against is cyber extortion gangs, and they use a range of tools to achieve their objectives. One of those is ransomware, so they lock up the systems of their victims until those victims pay a ransom to unlock the systems or hopefully find another way to get themselves back online. The other thing they're doing, and they're doing this increasingly, is stealing information. You don't need ransomware for that. You walk into the system, you steal information, and you threaten to make it public unless the victim pays a ransom.
In October last year, Australia was hit by one of the largest data breaches in its history. CyberCX was part of the response.
Medibank was part of a string of attacks against well-known, popular household brands in Australia late last year that formed something of a wake-up call.
Authorities won't reveal details about the hack. We want to find out who was behind it.
I'm on the way to meet a man who was working with Medibank when the hack was first detected. John McPherson used to work in international security overseas. He's home now and gets called in for major cyber incidents. We're hoping to find how the first few days after the hack unfolded.
I received a call quite late at night on the 12th of October, the night before it became public. So the first priority was containing the attack and making sure that the systems were secure. After that, the very lengthy process of forensic investigation and trying to understand exactly what had happened, what the parameters of the attack were, began in earnest.
How would you describe the mood of the team?
I think with all of these attacks, they are intense, they're stressful, it's hard not to feel anxiety, but you have a good plan, you execute that plan.
6 days after the attack, the hacker sent an ominous message directly to the Medibank CEO's phone.
Hi. As your team is quite shy, we decided to make the first step in our negotiation. We found people with very interesting diagnoses.
They were threatening to release a so-called naughty list, which was a list of 100 people who had received various forms of highly sensitive medical treatment. So an outright threat of releasing the most damaging kind of material as a way of trying to extort money.
For Claire O'Neill, Australia's first cybersecurity minister, this was the second major breach in as many months.
Look, I just think it is just a low act of a subhuman type of person to take personal health information, the most private thing that you or I could have, and try to use that for money. It just disgusts me, and it does tell us that we are dealing with a particular type of scumbag here.
The hackers doubled down, ramping up their threats.
In the event of a negative outcome of the negotiations for us, we will do everything in our power to inflict as much damage as possible for you, both financial and reputational.
They want you to panic and then pay. I think in the Medibank case, the hacker seemed to enjoy the media and the notoriety. They seemed to think that the negative publicity would be a trigger for Medibank to pay a ransom, when in actual fact it's quite the opposite.
After almost a month of back and forth with the hacker, in November, Medibank confirmed that 9.7 million of its current and former customers had been impacted. And the hackers, quoting Confucius, published their ultimatum. They demanded almost $10 million, or in 24 hours, the stolen data would be released. Finally, Medibank made the decision not to pay the ransom.
On the 9th of November, the so-called naughty and nice list of customers' details were released.
Lawyer Andrew Watson was watching the drama unfold. He's led many major class actions and knew how large the impact of this breach could be.
People have just been devastated by the circumstances of what's occurred. We've had people who have had procedures that have involved termination, who, for obvious reasons, didn't want that public. We've had people who were subject to drug and alcohol treatment who have been devastated by the fact that that might become known.
I think for some Medibank customers it was obviously deeply upsetting. I think for others it wasn't a material issue. The important thing is Medibank's refusal to pay a ransom results in keeping Australian companies safe from future attacks. It makes it easier for companies in the future to refuse to pay criminals for data that they've stolen.
The Australian Federal Police were in charge of investigating the hack.
So you've got no doubt that that Medibank hack was sourced in Russia?
We've got no doubt that a number of the cyber criminals who are involved in that attack were based in Russia.
Can you tell us anything about the people behind it?
No, I can't go into that, John, given the ongoing investigation.
As the crisis deepened, inside Medibank, the team was scrutinising their system for any trace of the hacker.
What does the forensic team look for when it does its investigation?
Forensic teams are sifting through terabytes of data and hundreds of millions of lines of code. They're looking for the traces that hackers leave in the system. So they're looking through computer logs, they're looking for the triggers of malware and viruses that they leave behind in systems. They're looking for traffic that leaves an organisation and travels overseas.
The way the criminal groups operate makes tracking them all the more difficult. Gangs sell access to software that harms a network, and they control ransom negotiations with the victims. But it's hackers known as affiliates that make the initial breach.
So an affiliate is a fancy word for people who buy into a ransomware or a cyber extortion model. I guess you could say it's a bit like a franchise, but instead of a business person buying access to the McDonald's brand and supply chain and tech innovation, an illegitimate cyber criminal buys into a ransomware or a cyber extortion model. So they might rent the malware, the ransomware. They might get access to that group's dark web resources, their portals for leaking information, and they'll do all of that, of course, for a monetary incentive. They get to keep a big portion of the ransoms that they harvest.
The gangs each develop their own ransomware, a type of malicious software. If there's a trace of that ransomware in an attack, it can be credited back to the gang.
Cyber criminals can use an exploit like a lure, a phishing lure, and you can click on that link and then malware is uploaded. And they sit and they wait and they do reconnaissance, sometimes up to 6 months on your systems, work out what your valuable data is to you and how they can steal it.
Medibank's negotiators had been engaging with the hacker for weeks.
What organisation are you from?
In this case, we'd better be anonymous. Just a ransomware group.
The hacker claimed to be affiliated with several well-known cyber gangs, but the Medibank team was sceptical.
The hacker was not able to give any confidence that they were affiliated with a criminal group. So they were never able to demonstrate that they were part of a group who would do what they say they were going to do.
Ultimately, the blog the Medibank hacker decided to leak the data on offered the best lead. Jeremy Kirk is a cyber analyst and agreed to take us through the evidence.
There's several clues as to who might be responsible, but nothing is 100%. And when the Medibank data, the personal data, started to be released, it was released on a blog site. And this is common for ransomware gangs to release stolen data on blogs in order to try to get the victims to pay. This blog had a bit of a technical history, and it had kind of a tie to another ransomware gang called REvil, which was one of the largest ransomware gangs. So the belief is that the people who were responsible for the attack against Medibank may be linked to those people with the REvil ransomware gang. But again, nothing is 100%, it's just a suspicion.
So who is REvil?
Yeah, REvil, it stands for ransomware evil, and it was one of the biggest and most successful sort of ransomware groups. It made at least $100 million. It was similar to other ransomware gangs in that it was as a service, so other cyber criminals could sign up and use the ransomware. It conducted some of the largest ransomware attacks at the time and caused an enormous amount of damage to businesses and organizations.
REvil sat at the top of that ransomware kingdom for a very long time.
John DiMaggio knows the gang, referred to as both REvil or REvil, very well.
One of the big things that they did and that they made famous was the double extortion model. What REvil did was they didn't just encrypt their victims' data, but they also stole the data and they would post bits of it publicly on their website in order to embarrass victims and sort of entice them to pay the ransom.
In 2020, the gang targeted several high-profile companies in the United States and turned their ransomware on celebrities.
REvil went after the New York-based legal firm that had strong ties to both politicians and the entertainment industry. As they looked through it, they started to see very popular names like Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, President Donald Trump, and there were others as well. And they began to believe that they would be able to get, people like Madonna to pay them this vast amount of money, and then they jumped to the President of the United States. It's just amazing they would be that dumb to threaten the President of the United States, but they did. They really put their target on their own back when they did all of this.
There were a few pivotal incidents in mid-2021. One was the attack against Colonial Pipeline, which was the big energy provider in the US. That wasn't rEvil, it was a group called DarkSide, but the groups were kind of linked. And then there were a couple affiliates for rEvil that conducted attacks against JBS Foods, which was the large abattoir. And those incidents really elevated ransomware to a national security concern, particularly in the United States.
The ransomware attack they did against JBS Foods, that was an example of how they could cause disruption that crossed borders, that caused operational disruption of a significant degree. And the ransom they demanded for that, which was paid, was about $11 million US.
John DiMaggio was monitoring REvil every step of the way.
Once I gained access to the crime forums, now they were there every day, and I could see the conversations they were having with other criminals and even participate in conversations.
He even applied to join the gang, posing as a hacker.
We got pretty far in the interview, but what they did at the end caught me off guard. They asked me about Russian folklore, and they asked things that I believe that they thought only a true native Russian would know. And we weren't able to Google anything quick enough to figure it out, and that was the end of our interview. It's organized crime. It's an organized group of cyber criminals that work together and share money, and it's a modern-day version of the mob.
So this is the way that ransomware gangs are often structured. There's a boss kind of at the top, or maybe a couple of different bosses. There's kind of a layer of middle management, and those middle managers then interface with the people who actually do a lot of the work. There's an HR function, which is responsible for recruiting other cyber criminals and people who want to be a part of it. There's coders who develop the malware, which is actually the malicious software that's infecting computers. You'll have an offensive team as well. So once a company or organization is infected with malware, they'll take over and go into that organization, figure out where their sensitive assets and data are in order to steal that data and then also encrypt it. And then finally, after that has happened, they usually send an extortion note to a company, which is where the negotiators come in, and they're responsible for trying to extract as much money as possible from the victim.
We've seen over the years that some of the big drug gangs, the Medellin drug cartel, etc., came up with these sorts of corporate structures. Is this the cyber equivalent of the Medellin drug cartel?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like looking for efficiency in any way, and that's what they've discovered. They've been able to get scale and efficiency and attack more companies and organizations than ever before.
So how do we know this is the sort of structure that some of these groups are implementing?
Yeah, so in early 2022, there were tens of thousands of chat messages leaked on the internet that belonged to a group called the Conti ransomware group. And it was basically their entire communications for 2 years. And so it really just opened it up for researchers of like, okay, this is what it's like day to day in a cyber criminal group.
The leak that cracked open the inner workings of the Conti gang was revenge for the group's support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. More than 60,000 internal messages reveal in forensic detail Conti's negotiation strategies and HR disputes. They also provided insight into how other big cyber gangs, like REvil, operate. Going through some of these leaks, there's one from the manager who says,
Your next salary depends on my good mood, and anybody who doesn't reply within 3 hours of me trying to contact them gets a strike against their name, 2 strikes and you're out. It's a pretty ruthless organisation.
Yeah, the managers were pretty frustrated with their employees, and they had high turnover as a result too. And clearly, the chats showed, management was upset with this because they're trying to pressurize, their employees to get more productivity out of them. It just happens to be, productivity motivated by crime. Here we have another one. This month, 3 people were fined for absenteeism and various mistakes that led to losses. These fines will go to the bonus fund for employees of the month. So this is really strange, right? Like, these are normal sort of things that managers would deal with in normal companies. And here, this is a cyber criminal organization, right, that has an employee of the month.
Chats reveal that Conti's leadership was particularly unhappy with their ransom negotiators, complaining, "We bargain like school children. Gangsters don't behave like that."
We've got a recording here of a woman from Conti ringing up a victim, pressuring them for money. Let's listen.
Good day. I have that you speak English too. Look, I'm calling you from Conti the Way Group. Your company right now in negotiations with our group regarding data recovery.
I find that chilling. This is a woman from a crime gang. Essentially, they're effectively holding a gun to the head of the firm, and it sounds like someone's ringing to say you haven't paid your electricity bill.
Exactly, they're calling. It's a very aggressive tactic to start calling and harassing organizations. And ransomware gangs do that. They pull out all stops to try and get that organization to pay, including kind of running a call center.
Our researcher, Jess Longbottom, managed to contact a hacker who worked with several cyber gangs. He also claimed he was part of REvil. He agreed to chat with us on the encrypted site Telegram.
So we're hoping to chat to him and find out a bit more about the group.
And hopefully Medibank.
Definitely. So I think he's online now. Hi. How do you feel when you hack into a system? He says, great, it's a feeling of being on top of the world, like nobody can touch you.
He claimed he travelled freely between Eastern Europe and the UK and had no fear of arrest. He said he loved targeting American companies.
Let's ask him about Australia.
Look at this. Yes, let me tell you something. Australians are the most stupidest humans alive. So pretty strong language there. And they have a lot of money for no reason, a lot of money and no sense at all.
Stupidest humans alive. There's such hostility from him towards the US and Australia.
Yeah, it's quite incredible.
I think we should ask him about Medibank.
Yep, okay. Do you know who's behind the hack?
In the setup for the interview, we had not mentioned anything about Medibank, so we were surprised he answered our questions so quickly.
So he's come back with the shush emoji, and just an XX, which I think that relates to blogXX, which is the blog where the Medibank data leak was actually published.
We asked if blogXX and REvil were the same people.
Wow, okay, the answer is yes, however, there is some new faces. Okay, wow, so he's saying that it's REvil and blogXX. They're connected.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So is it correct that REvil was involved in the Medibank hack? Huh. Yes, indeed.
So he's confirming, as much as we can trust him, that REvil was involved in Medibank, which is really interesting because there's been so much speculation that they were.
Exactly.
That to have him saying that really contributes towards the picture.
And interesting, because lots of people said that the attack wasn't sophisticated enough to be Reval. So
I think we should put to him that the Medibank hack caused distress to millions of Australians and see what he says about that.
yeah. I could not care less, is his response. Wow.
Completely without empathy or morality.
Yeah, exactly. So much bravado.
We sent our conversation with the hacker to John DiMaggio.
My professional opinion is this sort of second rising of Reval that we've seen over the past year is not the original group. They simply have access to the infrastructure and to the Reval malware. In my opinion, someone else is using their malware today.
No, this is for all of the ones that are occurring.
To evade authorities, gangs are morphing all the time. Hackers come and go, but the ransomware they develop is still used.
We've seen with some groups, once they create too much harm and fear, they get too big for their boots, that's when they're most likely to attract the attention of global law enforcement. After that, those groups have metastasised, their affiliates have left the big, bad ransom and cyber extortion gangs, and they've moved on to smaller gangs and they're plying their trade through smaller, lower profile groups. So the threat has changed, it hasn't necessarily diminished.
Months later, the damage of the Medibank hack is still being uncovered.
Effectively, every Medibank customer's details were placed on the dark web. Given the sensitivity of the data, it seems likely that Medibank should have been looking at a proper encryption protocol or a de-identification protocol so that the data, even if hacked, would have been useless to the hackers.
There was criticism of Medibank's storage of personal data. What's your opinion of that?
I think every organisation in Australia is now rapidly trying to assess how much data they hold, how secure it is, whether they need it or not, how long they've retained it for. I think it goes back to the question that as a nation we've placed too much value on collecting data and not enough value on how we secure it and whether or not we actually need to keep it.
Medibank is one of a string of hacks that has made cybercrime a key priority for the federal government.
Hey everyone.
In Australia, a cyber attack is now reported every 7 minutes.
For businesses these days, cybersecurity is as important as having a lock on the door. An increased awareness.
Rachel Falk is on the panel developing the government's new cybersecurity strategy.
So all of us understand.
One of the options being considered is starving the gangs of funds by making the payment of ransoms illegal.
From someone breaking into your house.
Once you get the ransom note, the damage has been done by that point. You're either in paying ransom mode or reputation salvage mode. Remembering, it's a bit like the house always wins here. They always keep a copy of your data. You can then pay and they will not release their data, allegedly will not release data on the dark web for sale, but you never know what's going to happen with the copy of the data that's stolen.
What's your view on a company that's been hacked considering paying a ransom?
Well, obviously it's a challenging situation in the boardroom, absolutely, and it will never be black and white.
The Australian government's really clear advice is that we would ask that Australian companies, organisations and individuals do not pay ransom because this simply feeds the business model of cyber hackers.
So ransomware is one of the biggest cyber threats that we face as a country. And
we're not powerless when it comes to cyber attacks. We can hack back at these people and use the same tools that they are using to hurt Australians to hurt them. And the instruction of the Australian government now to the Australian Signals Directorate, the cyber guns of the Australian government and the Australian Federal Police is you go, you rove the world, you find these people and you hurt them before they can hurt us.
It's the AFP Cyber Command, which is now tasked with going after or disrupting the cyber gangs.
Disruption is about frustrating their ability to operate and stopping their ability to operate.
While we're at AFP's Sydney headquarters, news breaks of another hack.
We've heard there's been a major cyber incident. The team's pretty tight-lipped about what's happened, but what we do know is that a loans, credit card and insurance company has been hacked and more than 200,000 customer records stolen. The team's being briefed and are on standby.
Days later, Latitude Financial revealed the hack was much larger, with the data of 14 million former and current customers stolen.
I think it's now the new normal. We are seeing the incidence of ransomware attacks becoming more prevalent, both in terms of the number, but also the scale, the sophistication and the impacts on our community.
Do you think most Australians understand how nasty this new world is?
No, I don't. I think it's an evolving situation for all of us.
Increasingly, there's been a shift to disruption, which is a way to get at these gangs before they can cause harm. The FBI and its global law enforcement partners and Australian law enforcement are getting better at this. We've seen the FBI and other global law enforcement partners seize infrastructure, so these groups are forced offline. We've seen them infiltrate groups to get the decryption key so that when they engage in ransomware, global law enforcement can come in and help those victims by giving them the decryption key rather than those victims having to pay a ransom.
It was that arsenal that the Federal Bureau of Investigation used to bring down REvil after the gang carried out one of the largest attacks in history.
When Kaseya was attacked, what happened is they had about 1,500 downstream customers that REvil leveraged their software to infect with their ransomware. So instead of just having one large corporation now being held ransom, they had 1,500 companies being held ransom.
Unlike a lot of technology companies, Kaseya is pretty easy to understand.
The hack affected companies in at least 18 countries, including Australia, closing down supermarkets in Sweden and impacting kindergartens in New Zealand.
And discover how Kaseya can help you simplify your systems management tasks.
So this was a really good example of REvil trying to maximise harm by hitting one organisation that provided services to thousands of others. They demanded a ransom in that case of $70 million.
The attack came only weeks after President Biden called on President Putin to rein in Russia's cybercriminals.
I did what I came to do.
The US made an arrest and the gang's leak site went offline. Then, in a surprise move, in 2022, Russian intelligence raided 14 members of the group. But it wasn't the end of REvil's ransomware.
The guys that they arrested were all very young men. They were primarily affiliates. They were not the core members of the gang. They weren't the ransomware developers. They weren't the ones supporting all these operations. They were simply the people that were the hired hackers. It doesn't stop the attacks. They can just come back under a new name and continue business as usual.
Wow. I have been providing initial access to you.
The hacker we spoke to earlier told us the 14 members were now out of jail and that he was supporting Russia's war effort by providing initial access to Ukrainian-owned infrastructure. John DiMaggio was not surprised. He believes that the original masterminds behind REvil are hacking for Russia.
They are supporting the war in the Ukraine. Think about it, even as affiliates, they're some of the best hackers in the world. So I 100% believe that that is how Russia is utilizing them. They're helping the Russian intelligence services, creating malware and facilitating attacks against the Ukraine to sort of better the mission of Russia.
As the war in Ukraine loomed, DiMaggio says Russia's cybercriminals were given an ultimatum. Hack for your country or your assets will be seized and you'll go to jail.
We know that these crime gangs have always had a pretty cosy relationship with Russian intelligence and security agencies. We've seen those leveraged during the Russian-Ukraine war. We've seen in particular some groups that have come out and said, our allegiance is to Russia and we will engage in activities to support Russia's cause and to undermine Ukraine.
In Ukraine, cyber attacks are about more than just money. They're about life and death. We've come to Kyiv to track the Russian cyber gangs targeting Australia. We're on the way to the agency responsible for protecting Ukraine, including against cyber attacks. Robert Potter, co-founder of Australian cybersecurity company Internet 2.0, is taking us there.
So we're heading up to SBU headquarters. The SBU is the primary domestic intelligence agency of Ukraine.
It's like our ASIO.
It's equivalent to our ASIO or MI5.
Security is tight. The SBU would be one of Moscow's top targets.
Oh, we're going to need to switch that off now.
Hello. Hello.
The man we've come to meet is Ilya Vityuk, the country's senior cyber intelligence officer.
That's me.
Great, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't have a
That's
card.
okay. I'm sure you don't go around handing out cards too often, yeah? In your job? Australians know about the invasion, the physical war, but are there now two wars going on?
They combine cyber attacks with special psychological information operations, and they do combine cyber attacks with kinetic attacks. Cyber attacks accompanied missile attacks on our energy sector since October. So they tried to destroy IT infrastructure of power plants and distribution companies simultaneously with cyber attacks to cause more damage and to make people suffer even more.
What can Australia learn from Ukraine's experience with Russian hackers?
No other country in the world has faced what Ukraine has faced in cyber domain, first of all. And the experience we have how to withstand when your enemy is more powerful is crucial. We've invented and used different kinds of algorithm techniques, tools that have proved their effectiveness. And we are ready to share this knowledge and this experience with the world.
In another part of the city, Internet 2.0 is working to strengthen Ukraine's cyber defence.
And they were talking to me about disinformation.
The other founder, David Robinson, has just arrived.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the whole protection of Ukrainian sort of infrastructure.
I mean, the amazing thing is we can see the international cyber war on our dashboards all over the world. If the Russians, for example, were hacking one of the computer networks we're protecting, the systems can detect, flag that Russian cyber attack using algorithms, using lots of pieces of technology, all in the cybersecurity industry in order to identify, flag, and then view that threat, and then we can basically block it.
The team's security engineer, Rafig Jabrailov, has already got to work. Here he's monitoring Russian cyber attacks.
So when someone in Russia makes an attack, you can see that here?
Yes.
In real time?
In real time, with the live data, we can see their IP addresses. We can detect their rough estimated locations.
It's a never-ending battle, isn't it?
Yes, it's basically a cyber war going between engineers and attackers. So, as you said, it's never ending, and as much as they are improving their skills, we need to do it twice, 3 times more to be ahead of them.
It is the first war in history between two major cyber powers, Russia and Ukraine. We've never seen this before. And right from the beginning of the conflict, cyber has been an ever-present dimension of that conflict.
Catherine Manstead has analysed how effective Russia's combination of traditional and cyber warfare has been.
From the outset, Russia has made an attempt to coordinate its cyber and its conventional effects. It hasn't always been successful, and in fact, towards the beginning of the war, it did better in this, perhaps because it had more time to plan and coordinate. On one day in the first week, we had a missile strike on a broadcasting tower. We also had a cyber attack against a broadcasting company, as well as a broader information campaign. Russia said it was going to disable Ukraine's quote-unquote disinformation system. It was targeting people on social media. It even was targeting the elderly via phone calls. All of that was about creating chaos.
So Ukraine launched its counter-offensive and in October hit the Crimea Bridge. How did Russia respond to that?
So we enter a new phase in many respects in Russia's conventional cyber and information war. On the conventional front, it's hitting civilian targets again. Ukraine's looking into a winter and it's going after energy assets, sending millions of Ukrainian citizens into blackout. It's also hitting water assets. And that's mirrored in many respects in the cyber realm.
What implications does this have for the next major military conflict?
Every cyber defender and every cyber attacker around the world will be looking at this conflict so closely. And they will be learning the lessons from Russia-Ukraine. Russia has not always done as well as it could have at precisely coordinating cyber and kinetic effects. In the next war, I would expect we'll see adaptation and an even closer interlinkage between those two domains.
Firewall edge routers into critical infrastructure.
When there's a cyber attack in Ukraine, the response will come from this room. It's the nerve centre of the country's cyber defence. And the team reports directly to President Zelensky.
Yeah, so this is the threats to Ukraine and Europe, and you can see the different key groups. So they're just tracking numbers of attacks.
So these are the different sectors that have been targeted, yeah?
Yeah, and these are the different attack tools that are used.
While looking at the list of the different groups attacking Ukraine, I see REVIL.
REVIL is the one that hit the Medibank attack.
So they hit Australia?
Yeah, these guys target Australia.
So the power cuts for a moment, not uncommon here. While the system's rebooted, the head of Ukraine's cybersecurity centre issues a warning.
My prediction for this year is that it is US, Australia, European Union countries who will be targeted even more than Ukraine.
So you think there'll be more attacks on countries like Australia because who support Ukraine because they're not getting the results they want in Ukraine, so they'll move on to other places, and it will be partly revenge for supporting Ukraine?
Yes.
Some of those names that came up on their board today are names that we're familiar with, launching attacks on Australia. What does that say to you?
It shows that we are part of the same environment, that they're studying the same bad guys that we are. What they really are Russian organised crime groups, being protected by the Russian government and in some ways becoming increasingly ideological in their support of the Russian government, and that exchange of you give us safe haven, we'll give you a cut, is now we will also target the ideological enemies of the Russian government.
In recent weeks, the big cyber attacks on Australia keep on coming.
Crown Resorts says it's working with police.
One of Australia's biggest property giants has been attacked by cyber criminals.
A cyber attack on Latitude Financial has now become...
The hack of Latitude Financial is now larger than Medibank.
Ultimately, what we see from these groups is they tend to be pretty good at outmanoeuvring law enforcement. They will phoenix to avoid pressure. So when the heat is on from global law enforcement, they will disband their group. They'll lie low for a bit, and then they'll pop up again. Maybe they'll rebrand, for example, and we've seen that over and over again. So unfortunately, it's going to be really hard for us to break the business model of cyber extortion.
As a nation, Australia is bracing to fight this ever-changing war against enemies who hide behind screens and know neither boundaries nor morals.
What's at stake is everything. When you think about the life that we live online at the moment, consider what things will look like in 2030, where our fridge and our electricity in our homes and our air conditioning and our car, everything is going to be connected to the internet. So we are going to have to get a handle on this problem well before then. I want cyber hackers to know that we are onto them and that we are watching them online and that we will come and hurt them if they come anywhere near our country.